Mubarak stands down. Now, the international community, of course, is watching the events in Egypt very closely. We are expecting to hear from the EU Foreign Policy Chief, Catherine Ashton, who is in New York at the UN Security Council. Of course, as soon as she starts talking about Egypt, we'll bring that to you live as it happens. Right now, let us go back to Tahrir Square. That's it there, and bring you the latest developments out of the Egyptian capital. Thousands of protesters, as I mentioned, continue to pour into Liberation Square. Our correspondent is telling us that many more are queuing up, trying to get into the area. The chants, as you can hear, getting louder. Just a few hours ago, the Vice President Omar Suleiman said there's a plan and a timetable for a peaceful transfer of power. He's also told protesters there'll be no reprisals against them. But they're not hearing that for now. A group of lawyers have filed a petition against President Mubarak. They accuse him of stealing wealth from the state and want to have him indicted. Joining us now live overlooking Tahrir Square is Al Jazeera's Hoda Abdel Hamid. Hoda, as I was just saying, the chants there getting louder by the hour.
Definitely getting louder. At the moment, they're saying that Egypt is above everyone. I think that's because throughout the day they've been having chants about how much President Mubarak allegedly owns in money, and so they were saying that a lot of the speeches today were about him or his family and the ruling elite around him actually stealing the money of Egypt, and there were demands and calls for him to return that money. We have heard earlier other slogans, mainly the people want the fall of the regime. The people want the fall of the regime. And I have to say, the fall of the regime today was mentioned many more times than just the call for President Mubarak to leave that we have heard over the past few days. So certainly a focus, a refocusing of the demands of the people here on Liberation Square.
So it's not just Mubarak anymore that they're asking to step down. It's the entire regime, the vice president, the prime minister as well. The vice president, we've seen, Hoda, has come out and made more concessions today, saying that the people who've been taken to the streets won't be prosecuted. What's been the reaction there to that? I mean, do they trust it?
Well, I have to say it's very interesting. The vice president came very early out saying that President Mubarak had signed the presidential decrees that give the go-ahead for constitutional amendment. Now, that happened around 10:30, 11 a.m. Cairo time, and probably it was a move to try to preempt the call for a million march again in Liberation Square, and I don't think that works very well. I don't think anyone here, at least on Liberation Square, has even bothered listening or thinking about that at the moment. The call is really here for a complete change of the entire system that has been ruling Egypt for the past 30 years. People are fed up with that, and people want to make sure that none of that will return once all this is over. It's a very, very long and complicated process, and I think most of the people here are aware of that, because once they leave Liberation Square, they do notice that the system is still in place, and the system is still quite strong. But I think the more the system shows itself strong and stable on the outside, the stronger the voices will be here in Liberation Square.
Okay, Hoda, let's just listen to the statement made on Egyptian state television by the Vice President Omar Suleiman, who again said that a plan was in place for a peaceful transfer of power, and he also stressed that demonstrators will not be prosecuted. Let's listen to that.
Today, the President signed a presidential decree for the formation of the Constitutional Committee to carry out necessary amendments to the Constitution and the parallel legislative amendments. He also instructed the Prime Minister to form the steering committee to follow up with the precise implementation of the agreements reached by the parties to the national dialogue, and a third fact-finding committee on the incidents and clashes of Wednesday last, and to refer the outcomes to the Chief Prosecutor to take necessary actions.
Well, joining us also live from Cairo is our correspondent Shireen Tadros. We're going to talk more politics with Shireen. Shireen, we heard the Vice President there talking of constitutional reforms, but the constitution in Egypt clearly spells out that the rules for successions lie in the hands of the president. This would leave the NDP firmly in power if they were to follow those rules, unless Mubarak was to intervene. I mean, is he likely to do so?
Well, what the people here want to see is constitutional amendments to prevent exactly that. What they don't want to see is a situation where the president at the end of the day has the final say on these amendments, because they don't believe that if that's the case, then they will actually be very far-reaching. They'll only be small pacifying amendments, and that's why they're still here, and that's why their demand is central to Mubarak leaving. The amendments that the vice president is talking about is really about setting up, if you like, a committee for those amendments, and not actually which amendments need to be made. Now, the vice president was talking before about needing to change the system with which the president would be nominated. That is key for people down here, but they don't believe that those kinds of changes will come while the president is here, and they don't buy the line that the government has been trying to sell to them, which is that what is needed is more time, because people here have seen over the years constitutional amendments made overnight. They've seen them being made in days, and so they don't understand why the amendments that need to be made can't be made faster, and why they need to wait months to see a presidential election and to see the kind of amendments to the constitution that they're asking for.
Shireen, Hosni Mubarak has ceded his powers before. I mean, I think it was last year or 2 years ago when he went to seek treatment in Germany. He ceded his powers to his prime minister. Is it really inconceivable to think that he could do so once again until elections are held in September if this pressure from the streets keep growing?
That's definitely a rumor or a thought that is being widely circulated, that one idea is that President Mubarak might go to Germany, where he has received treatment before. He may end up going there, and then slowly we would see him saving face and not necessarily standing down as president, but giving over the reins of power to Omar Suleiman. That again, it won't be good enough for people here, because they know that at any point he can intervene. A presidential decree would still come from him, and so that is why they're so afraid to leave the square, because essentially they think that once they leave the square, their power is gone. And what's interesting is to speak to people outside the central square, Liberation Square, to speak to people in other neighborhoods who haven't joined these protests, and there is a feeling there that Mubarak has given enough, that if he does do something like that and he leaves Omar Suleiman to run the country, that will really be a victory and nothing else is needed. But for those in Liberation Square, the reason why that's not enough is because they don't believe in the system. They don't believe that, in fact, if Mubarak does hand over the reins to Omar Suleiman, that will mean that he's out of the picture for good.
And in fact, the people in Tahrir are not just asking for Mubarak's resignation, but the entire regime now. So those demands changing, so it certainly wouldn't be in their interest, I guess. They wouldn't accept if he were to hand over powers to his vice president. But again, we're a long way from that as we watch these pictures from Liberation Square, Tahrir Square, the stronghold of these anti-government demonstrations in the last 15 days. For the moment, Shireen, thanks. We are going to go to Alexandria now, Egypt's second largest city. You can see pictures live from Alexandria on your screen right now. And we're going to speak to Ahmed Makawi. He's an engineer and blogger and a pro-democracy protester in Alexandria. Tell us about the scene where you are.
The protest here is very large, more than we expected. We moved around 1 hour ago. The spirit here in general is so high. People here, we hear about what happened in Cairo, about protesters at the parliament and so the numbers are getting larger than we thought.
Okay, large numbers. Unfortunately, the phone line is not very good, Ahmed Makawi, with Alexandria. Let me bring in our studio guest right now. He's been with us for the last 2 hours. Sabri Hafez is an Egyptian writer and a journalist, as we watch these live pictures from Alexandria. Are you at all surprised that the demands of the protesters in Tahrir is changing. Now they're not just asking for Mubarak to stand down, but the entire regime. Is that too ambitious, perhaps, given that they haven't even gotten their first demand?
No, of course, the demand for Mubarak to leave was just part of the demand. One of the interesting things has been very consistent. This slogan that the people need the regime to fall was from the very beginning, from day one. And it is very interesting because this is only one of the slogans that